The red and blue lights cut through the night like a warning Aisha Malik didn't understand yet, flashing across the windshield and turning her quiet evening into something sharp and unreal. She sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched. In her lap, her heart already racing even before the car came to a full stop. The smell of alcohol hung thick in the air, coming from her younger brother Samir, who had been laughing only minutes ago, careless and loud, as if nothing could ever touch him. Now his laughter was gone, replaced by silence as the police officer stepped closer, his flashlight slicing through the dark and landing on their faces. Aisha's mind scrambled for words, for explanations, for anything that could make sense of what was happening, but before she could speak, her father's car pulled up behind them, tires crunching against gravel. As if he had been expecting this moment all along. Everything shifted the second her parents stepped out of their car, their faces tense but controlled, not shocked, not confused, but prepared. Aisha felt it instantly, that something was wrong in a way she couldn't yet name. The officer asked a simple question, calm but firm, wanting to know who had been driving, and for a brief second, truth hovered in the air, fragile and waiting. Samir didn't speak. He didn't even look up. He just sat there, his silence louder than anything he could have said. Aisha turned toward him, expecting him to explain, to admit, to fix what he had caused, but he stayed still, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if disappearing into himself would solve everything. Then her father stepped forward, his voice steady, almost rehearsed, and said the words that would change everything. She was driving. Aisha felt those words hit her like a sudden drop, her breath catching as she stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be real. Her mother moved closer, her hand gripping Aisha's arm tightly, nails pressing just enough to send a clear message. There was fear in her eyes, but also something else, something colder, something that didn't ask but demanded. "Say it," her mother whispered quickly, her voice low but urgent, as if time was running out. "Just say it was you." Aisha's thoughts raced, her chest tightening as she looked from her parents to Samir, waiting for someone to stop this, to correct it, to tell the truth before it was too late. But no one did. Samir stayed silent. Her father stood firm, and her mother's grip only tightened in that moment. Aisha understood something she had never fully seen before, something that had always been there but never this clear. This wasn't confusion or panic. This was a choice. They had already decided, and she was just expected to follow. Her voice felt trapped somewhere deep inside her, but the pressure around her made it impossible to breathe, impossible to think clearly. The officer waited, his expression neutral, giving her the space to answer. Unaware of the silent storm happening between the four of them, Aisha felt the weight of expectation press down on her, heavy and suffocating. And without fully understanding why, she nodded slowly and said the words that didn't belong to her. "I was driving." The moment the lie left her mouth, everything seemed to move faster. The officer began writing, the questions became routine, and the story was set into motion as if it had always been true. Samir leaned back in his seat, relief washing over his face in a way he didn't even try to hide, while her parents relaxed just enough to show that this had gone exactly how they wanted. Aisha sat there, barely hearing the rest of the conversation, her ears ringing with the sound of her own voice repeating that lie over and over again. It felt unreal, like she had stepped out of herself and was watching someone else take the fall for a mistake that wasn't hers. As the night moved forward and the formalities ended, no one explained anything to her. No one thanked her. No one even looked at her the way they used to. It was as if her role had been assigned and completed, and now the family could move on without addressing what had just happened. Samir avoided her eyes completely, stepping out of the car and walking ahead without a word, while her parents stayed focused on the officer, making sure everything was settled. Aisha followed quietly, her steps slow and heavy. feeling like she had crossed into something she couldn't undo. By the time they got back home, the silence had settled in completely. The house looked the same, felt the same, but something inside it had shifted in a way that couldn't be fixed. Aisha stood in the middle of her room later that night, staring at her reflection, trying to recognize the person looking back at her. She had always believed her family would protect her, stand by her, choose her when it mattered. But tonight had proven something else entirely. Tonight had shown her that she was not the one they would save. And as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept returning, sharper each time it came back. They didn't hesitate. They didn't even ask. They simply chose him over her, as if her life was something that could be traded without consequence. That realization didn't explode into anger or tears. Instead, it settled quietly inside her, steady and cold, like something waiting for the right moment to rise. The days after that night moved fast on the outside, but felt painfully slow inside Aisha Malik's mind. As if time had split into two different worlds she was forced to live in at once. At home, everything looked normal, almost perfectly normal, like a scene carefully arranged to hide what had really happened. Her mother cooked meals as usual. Her father read the news without lifting his eyes. And Samir laughed in his room with friends as if the night of flashing lights and quiet betrayal had never existed. No one mentioned it, not even once. And that silence pressed on Aisha harder than any accusation could. Every morning she woke up hoping someone would say something, admit something, apologize. But the house stayed quiet, and that quiet began to feel like a message louder than words, telling her that what she had done was expected, not appreciated. Inside her, though, nothing was calm. The lie followed her everywhere, sitting heavy in her chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to focus, hard to be the person she used to be. She would sit alone and replay the moment again and again, searching for a version where she said no, where she stepped back, where someone chose her instead. But every version ended the same way, with her voice saying something that wasn't true and her family accepting it without question. That memory didn't fade. It sharpened, turning into something that refused to let her rest. She started noticing things she had ignored before, small patterns that now felt too clear to dismiss. Samir had always been protected, always excused, always given another chance, while she had been expected to carry responsibility without complaint. It had never felt this unfair before, but now it stood out like a truth she could no longer avoid. One evening, the weight became too much to carry in silence, and Aisha walked into Samir's room without knocking, her heart pounding, but her face calm. He looked up, surprised, his usual confidence slipping for just a second before he covered it with a careless shrug. She didn't waste time with soft words or hesitation. "You could have told the truth," she said, her voice steady but tight, holding back everything she had kept inside. Samir leaned back in his chair, avoiding her eyes. And for a moment, it seemed like he might actually think about what she said. But then he sighed and said something that made everything inside her shift again. "It would have ruined my life," he replied, like it was the most obvious answer in the world. Aisha stared at him, trying to understand how he could say that so easily, how he could reduce everything she was facing into something that didn't matter. "And this?" she asked, her voice slightly sharper now. "What about my life?" Samir hesitated just for a moment, but not because he felt guilty. It was as if he was searching for the simplest way to end the conversation. "You're stronger than me," he said finally, his tone almost casual. "You can handle it." That was it. No apology, no regret, no sign that he even saw what he had done as wrong. Just an explanation that made it clear he believed this was fair. That answer didn't break Aisha. It did something else. It cleared something inside her, like a fog lifting to reveal a reality she had refused to fully accept. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't fear. This was a choice he was comfortable with, a decision he believed was justified because it benefited him and her parents They'd supported it without hesitation. That realization settled deep, not as anger that burned out quickly, but as something colder and steadier, something that didn't rush but didn't fade either. After that conversation, Aisha stopped expecting anything from them. She didn't argue again, didn't bring it up, didn't try to force a conversation that no one wanted to have. Instead, she became quiet in a different way, more aware, more focused. Her thoughts shifted from questions to decisions. If they believed this lie could stand, then she needed to decide whether she would keep carrying it or not. And for the first time, she considered the possibility of doing something about it. She began thinking back to that night, not as a victim of it, but as someone looking for answers hidden in plain sight. She remembered the restaurant where Samir had been drinking. It's the way he had joked with the valet while holding his keys, the way he had stumbled slightly as they walked to the car. She recalled the cameras outside the building, the receipts. That must exist. The people who had seen him before everything went wrong. These weren't just memories anymore. They were pieces of something larger, something that could change everything if she chose to use them. But every step forward came with a weight she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about proving she was right. It was about what would happen after. If she exposed the truth, it wouldn't just affect Samir. It would tear through her family, break whatever fragile structure still held them together, and leave nothing the same. She found herself lying awake at night, staring into the dark, asking a question that had no easy answer. Was the truth worth that kind of damage? Or was staying silent the price she had to pay to keep things from falling apart? The more she thought about it, the more she realized something important. Things were already broken. The silence in the house wasn't peace. It was denial. The normal routines weren't comfort. They were distractions, and her role in all of it wasn't love. It was sacrifice without choice. That understanding didn't make her decision easy, but it made it clearer. She wasn't protecting a family anymore. She was protecting a lie. And, slowly, without announcing it, without showing it, Aisha began to prepare herself for what came next, knowing that whatever she chose would change everything, including who she would become when it was all over. The courtroom felt tighter than Aisha Malik had imagined. The air heavy with quiet tension, as if every breath carried weight, and every second mattered more than the last. She sat still, her hands resting in her lap, her fingers lightly gripping. The edge of a small USB drive hidden in her palm, the only thing grounding her in a moment that felt like it could slip away if she lost focus. Around her, everything moved with formal order. The shuffle of papers, the low voices of lawyers, the distant echo of footsteps, but inside her, nothing was calm. Her thoughts moved fast, sharper than ever, replaying every step that had brought her here, every choice she had made since that night, every moment she had stayed silent while the lie grew bigger than her. Today was different, and she knew it. Today was the moment where silence would either continue or finally break. Behind her, her parents sat close together, their presence familiar but distant, like strangers who shared the same space but not the same truth. Her mother's hands were tightly clasped, her posture stiff, her eyes fixed on Aisha, as if trying to send a message without speaking. Her father sat upright, his expression controlled, almost unreadable. But there was tension. In the way his jaw tightened, in the way his gaze stayed forward, avoiding her completely. Samir sat beside them, restless, his foot tapping lightly against the floor. His usual confidence gone, replaced by something uncertain and uneasy. For the first time, he looked like someone who understood that things might not go his way. Aisha didn't turn back again. Already knew what she would see, and it wouldn't change anything. Her focus stayed ahead, on the judge, on the desk. On the space where decisions were made and lives shifted in quiet but powerful ways. The case was reviewed with calm precision, each detail presented as if it was simple, as if it told a clear story that didn't need to be questioned. According to everything written, she had been driving. She had made the mistake. And now she was here to accept the outcome of something she didn't do. Hearing it laid out like that felt strange, like listening to a version of her life that didn't belong to her, yet carried her name. Her lawyer spoke briefly, following the expected path, prepared to move forward with what had already been agreed. Upon it would have been easy to let it continue, to stay quiet, to let the process finish and walk away with the consequences her family had chosen for her. That path was clear, simple, and painful in a way she had already started to accept. But the other path, the one she had prepared for in silence, stood right in front of her now, waiting for a single decision to bring it to life. Then the judge looked up, his voice calm but direct as he addressed her. "Miss Malik, is there anything you would like to add before we proceed?" The question was simple, but it landed with force, cutting through the room and settling directly on her. Silence that followed stretched long enough to feel endless, as if time itself had paused to wait for her answer. Aisha felt her heartbeat rise, steady but strong. Each beat reminding her that this was her moment, not anyone else's. Her grip tightened slightly around the USB drive as her thoughts lined up clearly for the first time. She could stay silent and protect what remained of her family, even if that family had not protected her. She could accept the blame fully, carry it forward, and allow everything to continue unchanged. Or she could speak, bring the truth into the open, and face whatever came after, no matter how difficult it might be. Both choices had a cost, and she understood that now more than ever. She took a slow breath and stood up, her movement calm but firm, drawing every eye in the room toward her. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, stronger than she expected. "There is something I need to show." Her lawyer turned slightly, surprised but attentive, ready to follow her lead. As she stepped forward and placed the USB drive on the desk, there was no hesitation in her actions now. No doubt left to hold her back. This was the decision she had already made long before stepping into the courtroom. The judge nodded, signaling for the file to be played, and the room shifted into a deeper silence, one filled with anticipation instead of routine. The screen flickered to life, and within seconds, the truth began to unfold without the need for explanation. The footage showed Samir outside the restaurant, his movements unsteady, his behavior clear enough to understand without words. It showed him taking the keys, stepping into the driver's seat, and starting the car. Every moment was captured, simple and undeniable, leaving no space for argument or confusion. Aisha didn't look away from the screen. But she didn't need to. She already knew what it showed. Instead, she listened to the silence around her, the shift in the room as the story everyone had accepted began to fall apart piece by piece. A soft sound escaped from behind her, her mother's quiet gasp breaking through the stillness, followed by the faint movement of her father adjusting in his seat, no longer as composed as before. Samir didn't move at all at first, as if frozen by what he was seeing, but then, slowly, he turned his head toward Aisha. For the first time since that night, their eyes met. And what she saw in his expression was not anger or frustration, but something deeper, something heavier. It was the realization that the truth had caught up with him, that the silence he had relied on was gone, and that there was no one left to stand between him and the consequences of his actions. Aisha held that look for a moment, not to challenge him, not to judge him, simply to acknowledge what had finally come into the open. When the footage ended, the room remained quiet, but it was no longer the same silence as before. This one carried truth, and truth had a way of changing everything without needing to say a single word. Aisha felt a strange calm settle over her. Not excitement, not victory, but a quiet release. Like something heavy had finally been set down. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't argued, hadn't forced anything. She had simply allowed the truth to speak, and that had been enough. The moment the truth came out in that courtroom, everything changed for Aisha Malik, but not in the way she had once imagined during those long, restless nights. The charges against her were cleared quickly once the evidence was reviewed, And the story that had been built around her name collapsed without resistance, replaced by facts no one could deny. Samir's situation shifted just as fast, and for the first time he had to stand in front of the consequences he had avoided. Process moved forward with calm efficiency. But Aisha barely focused on the legal details because what mattered most had already happened. The lie was gone, and with it, the role she had been forced to play. She walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter, but not triumphant. As if she had set something down that had been weighing on her for far too long, yet still carried the marks it had left behind. The real change began when they returned home, because the house that once felt controlled and predictable now felt uncertain, filled with a silence that no one knew how to handle. It was no longer the quiet that ignored the truth, it was the kind that followed it, heavy with everything that had been revealed. Her mother tried to return to normal routines, but her movements lacked their usual confidence. Her voice softer, unsure, as if she was walking through a space she no longer understood. Her father, who had always carried himself with quiet authority, now avoided long conversations, often leaving the room when Aisha entered, as if he didn't know how to face what had happened. Samir stayed mostly in his room, not laughing loudly anymore, not speaking freely. Moving through the house with a kind of awareness that hadn't been there before. Aisha watched all of this without stepping in, without trying to fix what had broken, because for the first time she understood that it wasn't her responsibility to hold everything together. She had spent years being the one who adjusted, the one who absorbed pressure, the one who made things easier for everyone else. But now that pattern felt distant, like something she had outgrown without realizing it. When her mother finally approached her one evening, her eyes filled with regret, her voice unsteady as she said, "Sorry," Aisha listened, but the words didn't carry the weight they once might have. They were real, but they were late, and while they acknowledged the pain, they didn't erase it. Aisha nodded quietly, not rejecting the apology, not fully accepting it either. It's because some things couldn't be resolved with a single moment of regret. Her father never offered a direct apology. But his silence spoke in a different way. Now, not as control, but as discomfort, as if he was struggling to accept a truth that didn't fit the version of events he had created. Samir, on the other hand, changed in a way that was harder to describe. He didn't argue or defend himself anymore, didn't try to justify his actions or shift the blame. He simply became quieter, more careful, as if he had finally understood the impact of what he had done, even if he didn't have the words to express it. One day, he paused near Aisha in the hallway, as if he wanted to say something, but then he just nodded slightly and walked away, leaving behind a silence that felt more honest than anything he had said before. As days turned into weeks, Aisha realized that staying in that house was no longer right for her. Not because she was angry, but because she needed space to rebuild something that had been shaken deeply. The decision to leave came without drama, without arguments. It's just a quiet understanding that she needed to move forward in her own way. When she packed her things, no one tried to stop her. And that, more than anything, confirmed that this was the right choice. Her mother watched from the doorway, her eyes filled with emotion. Her father stayed in another room, and Samir remained out of sight, but the absence of resistance made the moment clear. This was not an escape. It was a step toward something. New dot in her new apartment, everything felt different. Not just because of the space, but because of the silence it held. This silence wasn't heavy or uncomfortable. It was calm, steady, and entirely hers. For the first time in a long while, Aisha could think without pressure, without expectation, without the constant need to adjust herself to fit someone else's decisions. She spent her evenings reflecting on everything that had happened, not with regret, but with a growing sense of clarity. She had once thought that exposing the truth would feel like victory, like a moment of power that would make everything right again. But what she felt instead was something quieter and more lasting. There was relief in knowing she had not allowed the lie to define her, but there was also a sense of loss. because the family she thought she had was not the one she had experienced. That realization was painful, but it was also honest, and honesty, she learned, was far more valuable than comfort built on silence. Over time, that understanding brought her a kind of peace she hadn't expected. Not loud or dramatic, but steady and real, like something that didn't need to prove itself. Aisha no longer thought of what she had done as revenge, because it hadn't been about hurting anyone or making them suffer. It had been about choosing herself when no one else did, about refusing to carry a burden that was never hers to begin with. The consequences had reached everyone in different ways, but for her, the result was clear. She had lost the illusion of a perfect family, but in return, she had gained something stronger. Something that couldn't be taken from her again. She had gained the ability to stand in her own truth, and in that truth, she finally found the peace she had been searching for all along.